Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. President Trump of the United States is the first US president who is impeached twice, and the impeachment article is now moved from the House to the Senate, and the Senate is where the trial for his impeachment would take place. His lawyers would be there, and lawyers from the government side, from the Senate side would also be there. This is important on many levels, the impeachment of President Trump. First of all, it talks about, it rather brings out the internal divisions within the American politics and American society for that matter. In last 4 years, the rise of militias in US, the rise of right wing in US has alarmed not just the people of the United States, but people around the globe as well, who have stood for democratic values and liberalism for that matter. This is a big debate that is taking place at the moment worldwide. The impeachment certainly is one of the biggest debates at the moment in the political arena. Whether impeachment would take place in next week, that is not clear, and it certainly might not take place next week. It might take more days. But the thing is that the rise of militias is something that concerns the US politics. 21,000 troops would be deployed in Washington DC for the inauguration of Biden administration. Joe Biden would take the inauguration on the 20th of January, and 21,000 troops would be deployed. This is more than 3 times the US troops in Afghanistan, Syria and Iraq. Certainly to keep a check on the terrorist activities in Washington DC, but this terrorism this time is not the terrorism that we have been talking about in last 20 years for that matter. This terrorism is the white supremacist. This terrorism is the homegrown American terrorism. We'll be discussing about this, the American politics, American society, impeachment, and the future of these militias and the future of aggression and aggressive politics in the United States. We'll be also be discussing about US foreign policy and US-Pakistan relations. When we talk about Afghanistan, we know that the US wants to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan, and this is also one of the important points between Pakistan and United States, the peace and stability in Afghanistan and in the region. We are joined in the studios by our special guest, Lieutenant General retired Raza Muhammad Khan, renowned senior analyst and former president of National Defense University, Islamabad. Welcome to the program, General Raza. On Skype, we are joined by Bariza Umar, analyst from United States, expert on international relations and specifically on American society and politics. Welcome to the program, Bariza. We are also joined by Mr. Shahid Khan, Democratic leader from United States. Welcome, Mr. Khan. I'll start with General Raza. Impeachment, first of all, this is a long process. It might take some time. But the thing is that US President Trump is the first US president to be impeached twice. Now, the impact of this impeachment on the US politics, it undermines the US idea of democracy and liberal values and what it stood for in last so many years. How do you see this impeachment, first of all?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think, first of all, I'd like to say that whatever happens in the United States, in the political arena, is of great importance to the entire world. It is of importance to the United States. It is of great importance to Pakistan because US policies have a direct bearing on peace, security, prosperity in South Asia and in Pakistan. Right now, you know, the peace process in Afghanistan is going on, and whenever the new administration comes, then I think one may be seeing new policies there, and therefore I think it is of great concern to us. I think democracy in the United States is working. While one has seen some very ugly, unprecedented incidents in the last few days, but the process of the impeachment, the start of this process, I think itself is a proof that the US democracy is very strong and it is working. Whether this impeachment succeed or it does not succeed, I think it is material, but it is not that immaterial. It goes to prove that the US Congress has taken the matter very seriously, and the law enforcing agencies are also very seriously considering to punish the people who were part of the attack on the US Congress. And if President Trump was involved in whatever happened in the last week, then impeaching him, I think, has sent a very strong signal for any repetition of this kind of unfortunate things in the future.
But a lot of experts, Bariza, a lot of people think that this rise of right wing is going to create more trouble for the American politics in future. I mean, in last 4 years, 5 years, the way President Trump has been very vocal about his support for the white supremacists, for that matter, the way he managed the Black Lives Matter. I mean, just look at the way these people attacked Capitol, and the police, American police, DC police was there. Their response to the attack was very different from their response to Black Lives Matter. So these divisions and these schisms, how do you see them in the American society and politics?
Well, it's certainly going to get worse before it gets better. However, I do think that one positive outcome is that Homeland Security, for example, has been flagging these groups and saying that white supremacy needs to be taken more seriously as a terror threat in the United States. And they were dismissed on that for many years now. And that is being taken far more seriously. There are still concerns on the left, and rightfully so, on the clampdown that is now taking place, with the fear that there's going to be a lot more technology brought in to create a little bit more of a surveillance state, with the idea that these people might be apprehended and tried, and those various ways of accountability. But traditionally, those same apparatuses have been used far more against the left. And given how Black Lives Matter had been treated, there's fear that, yes, this is going to be addressed. However, in the future, will the hyper securitization that might come of this affect people of color and the left much more? So there's going to be a balancing act.
Right. So the threat of the right-wing domestic terrorist threat is, I think, is a big one. How do you see this threat? And there are reports that even some of the former military officials have been found to have some connection with the right-wing terrorist groups in US. This can be, and also keeping in mind that these groups are armed, they're militias. And a few months back, FBI also busted a plan to kidnap the Michigan governor, for that matter. What is the future of these militias and these terrorist groups in US?
I think
Sorry. Bariza, you have a point?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Right, okay.
Okay. So I think these extremist groups are there in all countries of the world. You see them in India in particular. We have seen them in the United States. But they were never as prominent or as active as they have been there this time. And there was a very clear reason for that, and that was that President Trump wanted to use them, for whatever his beliefs were. He believed that, the election has been stolen, although he presented no evidence to any court in any one of the states. So I think these people were encouraged probably, and they were used for that particular purpose. And it is hoped, that the law enforcing agencies, which I said earlier, I think probably more than 200 cases are being investigated by the FBI and others. The National Guards, which previously, at the time when the Congress was attacked, was not called in. But there's a reason, because the US military, like the Pakistan or other militaries, they cannot come in aid of civil power. By law, they are not permitted to do so. In the United States, it is only the National Guard, which is like our civil armed forces. Only they can come, and it is, on the request of the state governor that they can be employed. So because it was happening in DC, and that is under the DC government, so probably there was some delay, or they were not being allowed to be deployed. But I think a lot of better sense has prevailed, and they are going to be now deployed in big numbers. And we
21,000. 21,000
yes,
is a big number.
Yeah,
Troops in DC.
we hope now, that the inauguration ceremony would be peaceful, and they would have taken all precautions, and I think things will go back to normal.
So talking about these divisions, Bariza, in an interesting message, rather a very unique message, the Joint Chief of Staff of the United States, he has issued an unusual message to all the military personnel, telling them that President Biden-elect would be their new president and the new commander-in-chief, and they should keep this thing in mind. So the point here is that the American society needs to keep this thing in mind, that President Biden would be the next president of the United States. But it also, this message also brings out the divisions, internal divisions, even within the military, I would say, because of course this message was needed, and the Joint Chief of Staff actually felt the need of giving this message to the military personnel. How do you see it?
Absolutely. I think there more of concern immediately in the political future is representatives in Congress and in the Senate who are who have been rumored to have been given tours to people who entered the Capitol on the 6th, the day before, basically showing them around. You had one representative who was tweeting the position of Nancy Pelosi. You have reports of some congresswomen like Ayanna Pressley, the panic buttons were taken out of her office. And so the fact that we have representatives in Congress who say that they are going to be bringing guns into Congress, or who say that they are there's one who has threatened to file articles of impeachment on day one for Biden. The more pressing immediate concern seems to be elected officials who can't really be trusted to engage in bilateral engagement at all. As for the military, domestically, they don't have as much of, as your previous speaker was saying, as much of a role to play. So yes, it's certainly telling that the military has felt the need to do that, and hopefully that will have some effect on former members of the military who have been involved in some of these insurrectionist events, but I think politically is much more concerning.
Right. General Raza, interestingly, the right-wing media, right-wing social media has played a big role in instigating such kind of thoughts and this kind of aggression in the US. And President Trump and his supporters have been using this right-wing media. You just mentioned India earlier. So we have an example in the region too. We have an analogy of what is going on in the US, but in a different way in India. How do you see this rise of right-wing media and the way politicians use it for their own benefits, and the way President Trump has been using it?
Well, I would say that, in this case, some of the media was really weaponized for some very unwarranted purposes. But then, it was Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms. If they have permanently banned and debarred the US president, so it also speaks a lot about responsibility coming back to the media. I'm talking of the mainstream media.
Right.
Yes, I mean, there is this right-wing media, and that has been there. And I think the Republicans have been using that very frequently in the past. And that is, I think, happening in India. It is happening in many countries, other countries of the world. And one has to be very watchful of that, because it is extremely difficult to control the media or to manage them. You can't control it, but probably you can manage it to whatever extent you can, and domestic regulations will have to be probably now reappraised, and Pakistan itself is in the process of reconsidering its own laws concerning the control of the media or the management of the media. Right. There were a lot of hue and cry or objections on that also, but I think it is necessary, and this has been shown now, because it can actually lead to a lot of instability, and if it can lead to this kind of disturbance, disharmony in the United States, then I think other countries, smaller countries, are much more vulnerable. A lot of lessons have also been learned from this, and I think I'd like to just point out one, and that is the system of the nomination of the US president, who has now been impeached twice. So probably the US parliamentarians will have to now be very careful in who they nominate as their presidential candidate.
Especially Republicans?
Republicans in particular. I think the Republican Party itself, in my view, this has been badly discredited in the US, probably not so much in the US because people have still voted for them, but internationally. And I think they'll have to do a lot of thinking and rethinking, how to get back their image, because Republican Party in the past, they've produced some great presidents,
but
President Truman and others.
That's right, but the point is, Bariza, that a lot of people in the Midwest, what we call the Bible Belt in the United States, they have grievances against the Democrats. They felt left out. I mean, some 8 years back during the Obama administration, they also were of the view that probably they didn't have much say in the American politics, in the American foreign policy for that matter, and hence we saw President Trump in the presidency, in the White House. So obviously there were reasons that brought in President Trump. How do you see that? The grievances of this Bible Belt, the grievances of the Republican voter for that matter, and his grievances with the new setup, with the liberal setup, Democratic setup?
So I think a lot of these grievances are going to happen. The Democratic Party since Bill Clinton has moved further and further to the center, and you have neoliberals there, and the more the Democrats have moved to the center, the more the Republicans have moved to the right, and the left has really been left out of the conversation. So the progressives have only recently been coming up, and we've seen that they have won in Congress. Just now, Georgia was a huge flip in a traditionally red state. And it's because I think people are finally realizing that they've been voting against their interests, even when you have someone who says that they are fighting for the working people. That's not actually what's going on. And so Biden is going to have to work with progressives to address the very real grievances that people have about poverty, about healthcare, debt relief. All of these things have made a huge impact on people's disenfranchisement and their loss of trust in a system that penalizes them. And so whenever you have these kind of unaddressed social grievances, you're going to have more fodder for extremist groups to be able to prey on them. So as long as these systemic problems can be addressed, I think there is a future where the United States can move more towards a balance which actually takes care of a population more than it does of corporations. And that's what's really going to happen. So apparently Bernie Sanders is going to be heading the Senate Budget Committee, which is not Labor Secretary, but he's going to have a huge say in how spending is going to happen, and hopefully bringing more progressives on board, having more progressive ideas that will help with the disenfranchisement of a lot of these people in the Bible Belt will help.
Right, right. We'll take a break, and after the break we are going to discuss about the US foreign policy, the new administration, Biden administration in the White House, their foreign policy towards Middle East and more specifically towards Afghanistan and Pakistan, our part of the world, in last few months we saw the ups and downs in the Middle East. The Trump administration did a lot of experiments with their foreign policy in the Middle East, and we also saw the way the Gulf states have been improving their relations with Israel, for that matter. Changes have been taking place in South Asia as well. A US agreement, Cpac agreement with India, US foreign policy towards China. All these things are very important for the region and for Pakistan-US relations as well. We are going to discuss about this, Biden administration in the White House and Pakistan-US relations after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're expecting, the world is rather expecting, US is expecting the new president-elect, President Biden, in the White House. Foreign policy of the United States is certainly very important for US itself, for the new Biden administration, and for the, our region, South Asia as well. General Raza, talking about this new foreign policy that Biden administration would be bringing in, first of all, we're talking about Afghanistan, let's say. So pulling out troops, US troops from Afghanistan. This was, I think, something that was very challenging for any US president. President Obama hinted at withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, but it was President Trump who actually did it, and withdrawing troops from Syria and Afghanistan, and that was a big task for any US president. How do you see that, and Biden administration's policy towards Afghanistan specifically and withdrawing troops from Afghanistan?
Okay, first of all, I think they need to totally discard the previous Trump administration South Asia policy, which was, prefaced and predicated on containing China and controlling Pakistan through India. That was a wrong policy, and that policy has failed, as the United States has seen it and as the world has seen it. And therefore, they hopefully will come out with a very balanced and innovative policy in South Asia, because that would serve the national as well as the national security interests of the United States, and also the people of South Asia, particularly Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I think the Foreign Office and the US Embassy in DC, I think they should immediately contact the new team of the Biden administration and communicate this and other recommendations and concerns to the US administration and brief them on it. When it comes to peace in Afghanistan, I think it should also be very clearly and logically communicated to the Biden administration that a solution to the Kashmir problem is directly related to peace in Afghanistan, because it's all about Pakistan's span of attention.
Right.
If Pakistan if attention is diverted towards the eastern borders, then naturally, it will not be able to pay that much attention to its western borders. And for Pakistan, I think threat from the east is much more than whatever threat is there from ISIS and TTP and others from Afghanistan. So therefore, I think that should be again another major component of whatever we recommend. And I think this will be the job of the US ambassador and the US embassy here in Pakistan to communicate to the new Biden administration to have this kind of a policy.
Right. We are joined by Syed Muhammad Ali, renowned expert on international relations and foreign policy. Welcome to the program, Syed Ali. Discussing about American foreign policy and the foreign policy of Biden administration. How do you see Biden administration's policy towards Afghanistan, and because that is very important for Pakistan and US relations for that matter? Jack Sullivan, the nominee for the National Security Advisor for President Biden, he said that US might keep some sort of intelligence presence or some troops in Afghanistan. That might very well be not acceptable to the Taliban. How do you see the future of US foreign policy towards Afghanistan and Pakistan-US relations?
Well, this is a bit of an opportunity, if you will, for Pakistan to, continue exercising leverage. I mean, it's quite possible that there will be an insistence now with the new Biden administration on the need for some minimal counterintelligence operations and presence. And I mean, for Pakistan, the opportunity is that as far as groups like Daesh and ISIS, I agree that for Pakistan they're not as big an existential threat. But if Pakistan aligns itself with the US and then to have a long-term engagement not only with the US as it has done in the past, but also perhaps with Afghanistan. But aligning that with the need for ensuring that Afghanistan does not become a launch base for cross-border sort of restiveness in any neighboring country, right? And Pakistan has, of course, also been accused in the past of doing that, but now Pakistan also has serious concerns, right, for what's happening on the Pakistani side. So there's that element. I mean, it'll be hard for the Biden administration to do another troop surge, as was done by President Obama. I think that is going to be quite difficult. But as far as the intra-Afghan talks go, again, in the past, the idea of the ROZ, the Reconstruction Opportunity Zone, wasn't quite well thought out, right? I mean, it was sort of in the middle of nowhere, near no port, right? And it wasn't economically feasible. But the idea was that there can be a zone of opportunity which has provided access to US markets, and Afghanistan and Pakistan have the opportunity of working together for long-term stabilization. So these are the kinds of opportunities that Pakistan can try to avail.
Right. And officially, General Raza, Pakistan has been bringing up this statement, and I would say this catchword: responsible withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. And not just Pakistan, by the way. Regional countries have been asking US for a responsible withdrawal from Afghanistan. How do you see this idea of responsible withdrawal from US Afghanistan?
I think NATO, ISAF, UNAMA, and the US command is very aware of that. That there is no question of any irresponsible, departure from Afghanistan, because then there's going to be a vacuum created, and that vacuum again will be occupied or filled in by the enemies of peace, as it was done, when the Geneva Accords were signed, and soon after that. So nobody wants that kind of a situation. They also know, that there are a large number of spoilers, peace spoilers. India is one of them, and there is this ISIS, and there is TPP, and ISIS, Pakistan, and Khorasan, and Khad, and some of the present Afghan rulers. They are all there. They don't want, that the peace process should succeed. So I'm sure, they're keeping all that in mind. What I'll recommend to that is that UNAMA needs to be, I think,
active.
engaged now more, so that UN presence is seen. That will bring more legitimacy and internationalization to the peace process, and that should be one of our recommendations, to the new Biden administration.
Right.
Even, if UN peacekeeping forces are needed for an interim period, I think they all should work on that.
Right. And Mr. Ali, Trump administration signed the Cpac agreement. Sorry, Mr. Ali, can you hear me? Right, I think there's some connectivity issue. General Raza, Trump administration signed an agreement, Cpac agreement with India. Now that was Pakistan's Foreign Office said that that the bottom line was that would disturb the regional stability in South Asia. That agreement, which probably is there to give India the real-time intelligence information on the area. What would Biden administration follow? What kind of policy? Such kind of policies like Cpac agreement would continue, and if they do, what would be the future of Pakistan-India relations and the role of the third party of US for that matter?
I think India has now been named as a non-NATO ally, and it's not only the Cpac agreement, but I think this is the CISMUA and the LIMUA, the logistic memorandum of understanding. They have been signed, and I think Pakistan is greatly concerned by all these agreements. This is going to badly disturb the present balance of power in the subcontinent. Pakistan was already, conventionally no match to India, and this is going to bring in the nuclear factor, which is not in the interest of regional peace and security. And the earlier the Biden administrations understand this, the better it would be.
But the underlying element is to contain China primarily. So that is the US obsession, to contain China. They would keep on arming perhaps India.
No, but unfortunately, that may be the aim, but more than 3/4 of the Indian military is deployed against Pakistan. So eventually, it is going to affect Pakistan more than China. China is not going to be affected at all on this, all these agreements. Probably China would make sure, and it has the capacity and the capability to look after its defense, even if India and the United States both partner against China. But Pakistan does not have that capability and that capacity. And therefore, I think these concerns must be pointed out to the US administration. And the government of Pakistan will also be compelled, now to enhance the defense budget to defend itself against all these changes, which the defense budget in the last few years has been static. In fact, it is in the negative. And now is the time, for the government of Pakistan to reconsider this. From this, I think all this discussion, I don't know how much time you have, but there are a few other lessons which I'd like to point out.
You just, sure. Before that, I was just thinking that you just mentioned Kashmir. And President Trump, while Prime Minister Imran Khan was visiting US, and he met President Trump in the Oval Office, President Trump himself talked about mediating on the issue of Kashmir. That was very important for Pakistan. Diplomatically, that was important. Biden administration, you talked about Afghanistan, and you also said that Pakistan needs to take up the Kashmir issue as well. Do you think that Biden administration would be interested in talking about Kashmir? Because Indians are, by the way, very touchy about this issue, and I remember the way they criticize the Trump administration even, their foreign office.
Yes, I think if Biden administration really wants that Afghanistan should be stable, that the US forces should withdraw from Afghanistan, and that Afghanistan does not pose any threat in the future to the United States, then I think they should prevail upon India to change its policies towards Pakistan, particularly as it relates to Kashmir. And because, as I said earlier, the solution of Kashmir is directly linked and related, to the resolution of the peace process in Afghanistan. So that is my answer. Now, what else can Pakistan do? I think all those years that about Indian terrorism, it needs to be handed in to the new Biden administration and the new national security team. And I think our embassy needs to personally brief them. If there is a requirement of the NSA traveling there, you should do that to point it out to them. Again, there are lessons, for our politicians that, if there is an election and soon after the elections, if the courts have decided that there is no proof of any rigging, then they should accept those elections rather than, contesting them and, bringing out mobs. This is going to fail. And I think, but at the same time, we should have lessons learned from this, that the government should be prepared for mob control if worse comes to worse.
Right.
I think the law enforcing agencies must see that there may be extremists, whether it is the PDM or the PTM or others, who may come and who may storm the capital in the future. So they should be prepared for that, and the PDM leaders and others must also know that if it has not worked in the United States, these kinds of pressure tactics will not work in Pakistan, and therefore it's better for them to respect the wishes of the people and the democratic decisions
Right.
of the people of Pakistan.
Right, right. This is certainly interesting. We have Syed Mohammad Ali back with us. Mr. Ali, talking about the Trump administration, their foreign policy, and talking about our part of the world, South Asia, their agreement, Trump administration's agreement with India, the Cpac agreement, that certainly was something that Pakistan is certainly now concerned about. How do you see the future of Biden administration, the future of their foreign policy with Pakistan, India, and China? So they are obsessed with China at the moment. We see the Trump administration was obsessed with it. Biden administration too. Some of their nominees for the Secretary of State and Antony Blinken's and National Security Advisor, they have mentioned China. What would be the future foreign policy of US with China and India?
So there will be some continuity and some change. I think as as far as India goes, there might be a bit more discerning attitude of this administration to sort of the human rights agenda. Right, but the compulsion of encircling sort of or containing China will remain, because with China there is this strategic rivalry, great power play, right, and China is the other big kid on the block. Now, I think, but this administration, and at least from the Pakistani perspective, there is a need to try and convince the American administration that as far as South Asia goes, I mean, using India in an antagonistic manner to keep a check on China is a policy that has been tried also by the Trump administration without sort of mincing their words. But there is a realization that the U.S. doesn't need to have this maximalist approach, right? This black and white approach when it comes to dealing with China. And there are issues like climate change, for instance, right? I mean, or sort of secure stabilization or preventing catastrophic conflict in South Asia, where China is also right next door. So there are areas where there is room for cooperation. And if Pakistan can somehow, be creative enough, in its approach, and harken back to the days of the rapprochement, that took place when Henry Kissinger and Nixon, those good old days. So I mean, there is an opportunity for Pakistan to package itself in a way which is quite distinct to how the Modi government is trying to play hardball with China. And of course, Pakistan then also needs to reconsider its own China policy, right? Because there's very little nuance, when it comes to how we can deal with China, and using these euphemisms of higher than the Himalayas and deeper than the sweetest. And some concerns. I mean, the former administration, Alice Wells, for instance, talking about predatory lending, right? But I mean, there were compulsions for Pakistan when it came to Cpac. But I mean, are we in places like Balochistan? Are we really allowing Cpac to be more participatory and provide local opportunities, right? So there needs to be, and within Cpac there's a possibility for greening Cpac energy projects, and this is something that at the climate summit our Prime Minister also spoke about. And these are areas where we could work with the US, and it would give the US an opportunity to actually cooperate also while it's competing with China, perhaps in the Southeast Asia, in that area, in the South, China Sea. Right. In South Asia, the US can exercise another point of leverage with the help of Pakistan. But the job to convince the US, the onus of that would be on sort of, our foreign office and or diplomats. to try and create this kind of a relationship with both these parts.
Right. This is interesting. General Raza, last question that is on JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran. That is, I think, the pillar of Biden administration's foreign policy. And they have said that they would bring back the Iran nuclear deal, and they expect that Iran needs to act more responsibly. Bringing back JCPOA would also bring back a lot of new trends in the Gulf, in the Middle East. We have recently seen, interestingly, the way Qatar has GCC. They have again, improved their relations with Qatar. What would be the future of it? And keeping in mind that Pakistan actually supported Iran on the issue of JCPOA.
Well, I think Mr. Pompeo only last week he compared Iran
Right,
to
yes.
Afghanistan. I think unfortunately he did that, and he also said that Iran is becoming the epicenter of activities from Al Qaeda. He did not give any proof, so I'm sure if a more balanced policies, which is the JCPO is UN accepted, endorsed policy, and I think if the Biden administration restores that, it will be in the national interest of the United States. But very quickly, why should the US stop opposing the Cpac? And one of the major reasons is that Afghanistan is living on borrowed economy, and therefore if Afghanistan can benefit from the Cpac, the United States has no reason to oppose the Cpac, and Pakistan must continue all its effort to redouble its efforts so that the Cpac should succeed, and we have no issues about that. Also, India is now, the United States must have seen in the last 4 years that India is not an asset, whether it relates to controlling Pakistan or containing China. India is actually a liability, and both Pakistan as well as China have physically proved that India is a liability to the United States and the rest of the world. So therefore they need to revise that policy also. Finally, the 5.5 million Pakistani Americans who are there in the United States, and the Pakistan-US trades should be the area of focus of Pakistan and the government of Pakistan, who could go in and who have got influence with the US administration, who should urge them on for greater cooperation with Pakistan and the people of Pakistan.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Syed Ali, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. General, it was a pleasure having on the program. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. That is all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.